friends and fiends, to HHN Trivia. Did you know these posters in Slaughter Cinema 2 were inspired by The Darkest Deal and Blood Moon Dark Offerings? There's tons of cool stuff to explore, and I, 6 Billion, will be your horrifying host. Now, before we get started, just know the game's easy to pick up, but if you have any questions, just check the description down below, because it's time to dive right into this week's categories. In celebration of Wolfman's release, we'll be looking at his history at HHN, followed by a deep dive into the graveyards and cemeteries of various haunts. We'll explore all forms of undead that have plagued the streets in Not Just Zombies, and shows centered around the icons of HHN in iconic entertainment. Blumhouse Productions will take the spotlight as our wild card, and don't forget both answers for every question in this category. Now let's get this party started and get hairy with the Wolfman for 100. In 2022's Universal Monsters Legends Collide, the Wolfman traveled to Egypt in search of this artifact. Lawrence Talbot was searching for the Amulet of Ra, or just the mummy's amulet, in hopes that its powers of the sun could overshadow the curse of the moon, which I guess almost makes the Wolfman the hero of this story. On to our first visit to the graveyards for 100. Between trips to Van Helsing's crypt in 2024's Universal Monsters Eternal Bloodlines, these specific details highlight the passage of time. Whether you thought the latest Monsters haunt hit a home run with its ambitious story, or not, the details were incredible, including the accumulation of snow and the destruction of some of the graves. Not Just Zombies for 100. These guys aren't zombies, but they overtook pop culture and every scare zone during 2013's event. Even more decisive than Eternal Bloodlines was the Walkers from The Walking Dead overtaking the entirety of USF. For what it's worth, there was actually a lot of stellar set design and ideas that we don't see as often today. But back in 2013, Universal hadn't quite experienced IP burnout yet. And today we know that too much of a good thing can be bad. Looking at you, Mikey. Let's see some iconic entertainment for 100. In 2006, the Big Four icons each hosted a section of Sweet 16, the Director's Cut, which was located in this rarely used for HHN location. In 2006 is when Universal added those giant globes into the lagoon for their nighttime entertainment, so naturally they had to make an appearance at the biggest HHN birthday party yet.
Happy birthday to you!
Time for Blumhouse Productions, and don't forget both answers if you want full points. Previously seen in 2017's The Horrors of Blumhouse, these scenes, one featuring Keyface and one featuring the Lipstick Demon, returned in 2024's Insidious the Further. While the Lipstick Demon's lair was even better in 2024, Audrey Rayner's death was much more haunting in 2017. But come on, Insidious the Further made up any shortcomings with the absolutely haunting sound design. I'm never gonna be able to listen to cymbals the same way ever again. And now that we're this much closer to HHN, it's time to check in with Larry Talbot again for 200. Despite several stellar haunts featuring the classic Universal Monsters, the Wolfman was the only one featured as a headliner during this event year. Even though in 2009, the Usher was the main icon, Chucky, Saw, and the Wolfman were revealed with the website launch and primarily used as the marketing headliners. And that sound means it's time for our first Carnage question, a follow-up for bonus points featuring our very own Herald of Chaos. Now for a whopping 350 points extra, 2009 was also the first year where the Wolfman's appearance was not based off Lon Chaney Jr. So what was the inspiration? Between the original design and Universal's new take on the classic starting in 2019, there was 2010's Wolfman film starring Benicio del Toro, which is what 2009's haunt acted as a teaser of. and it was a much better teaser than this, at least. And Frankenstein and Dracula didn't have new movies to promote. If you want to revisit these old websites, just head to hhngraveyard.com. Back to cemeteries for 200. Kane Cemetery, pictured above, was featured in this wickedly good fan favorite haunt. Filled to the brim with too many Easter eggs to count, the Wicked Growth, the Realm of the Pumpkin, featured some truly awe-inspiring set pieces and honored some unused event icons. They aren't just zombies for 200. These undead warriors invaded Central Park in 2019. The Vikings from Vikings Undead were pretty brutal, and man, were those props some of the most graphic the streets have ever had, including one of my favorites that's been used again and again. On to Iconic Entertainment for 200. Before she was an official icon, Chance made her debut in this stage show. In 2007, Jack's Carnival of Carnage wasn't just the name of the event.
Are you guys ready to get jacked up?
It was also the stage show that introduced the next part of Jack's story, along with Chance as his assistant.
Allow me to introduce my assistant for tonight's performance. This is my little harlequin of horror. Her name is Chance.
Ooh, from side character to event icon in less than a decade? Take that, Dr. Oddfellow. I hope you know your years as we look back at Blumhouse Productions for 200, where this scare zone during this year was the first appearance of Blumhouse at HHN. In 2014, it made perfect sense to showcase The Purge Anarchy in New York, as the franchise was finally reaching its potential with the release of the second film. Nowadays, the best ideas have already been done, and The Purge has unfortunately become synonymous with the cheap way to reuse costumes and assets. And a decade later, there's no reason Totally Killer shouldn't have been in the Enter the Blumhouse zone instead.
I think it's time for me to exercise my right to purge.
I hope you're all enjoying HHN Trivia so far, and just remember, there's clues all around if you know where to look. It's almost like a game within a game, but you didn't hear it from me. Anyways, let's see how the Wolfman is doing for 300. This Wolfman scare isn't from a Universal Monsters experience. It's from the only haunt where those classic monsters appeared alongside HHN's original characters. Unlike 2010's The Hallowed Past, 2015's Jack Presents 25 Years of Monsters and Mayhem celebrated everything Universal that made HHN successful, and not just the original nightmares from the creative team. And they weren't the only monsters you could find inside. Let's go back to the graveyard for 300. And I know most of you have probably been here before in 2019's Graveyard Games, but what was the name of this graveyard? There is such a storied history behind Ascension Parish Cemetery, which isn't confusing at all. And Graveyard Games was a near-perfect haunt that enhanced the typical ghost story for the 21st century. Hey, Blumhouse, get away from my originals! Not just zombies, still include zombies. This zombie celebration scare zone directly tied in with the events of an adjacent haunt. What caused all those zombies to escape in Zombiegeddon? Well, those zombies done crashed a parade float into the ZAP training facility. And I'm gonna be 100% real with you guys, those zombies are still better drivers than 90% of the Florida population. Now, some scare zones tend to share themes and ideas with haunts, but I do believe Zombie Gras, which of course used many assets from the Mardi Gras parade, is the only one to directly affect the story of a haunted house. Now let's look at some more iconic entertainment for 300. What was the name of Jack the Clown's inaugural show in 2000? If you took the Lunatics Playground approach to Nightmare Fuel, you'd have
Jacked up!
For 300, let's look back at Blumhouse Productions, where these two haunts from 2015 were the first ones based off a Blumhouse property. We've talked about both of them already. Insidious and The Purge, could both be found in the sprung tense. Even if The Purge doesn't really count, I've still gotta count it. Sorry, buddy, but hey, at least you had 2006. I do wish, though, that there was more footage of those fake guests getting pulled out of the conga line and purged. That's about the only thing it got right.
Oh, it looks like someone is trying to cut in line.
Billy, have you seen my son, Billy?
I want to give a shout out to my channel members because you guys are the real MVPs and you guys have kept me going. And if you want to get extended cuts of every trivia episode with even more knowledge, come and join the club. Plus, I need to feed the scaredy cats. Now let's keep this thing rolling with the Wolfman for 400. Besides the Universal Monsters haunt, in what other experience could you see the Wolfman, albeit briefly, in 2019? Now, I tried to plant the seed with that Sweet 16 clue. Both the Wolfman and music from the 2010 film made brief appearances in Halloween Marathon of Mayhem. For 400, these graveyards are only getting cooler, literally. Inside Winter's Night, the haunting of Hawthorne Cemetery, this vengeful ventriloquist tombstone could be found as an Easter egg. Beware the stare of Mary Shaw, and if you see her, do not scream, but I can't spoil the rest because I hear another Carnage question. HHN is like an onion with layers and layers, and for 450 points, which is a higher number than my current bank account, Mary Shaw's tombstone isn't the most prolific dead silence Easter egg at HHN. What is? It's none other than Billy the Doll, not Billy the Puppet, and not Billy the Me. You could even call it a crossover Easter egg with Billy appearing in the Insidious section of 2017's Horrors of Blumhouse. Both franchises that Lee Winnell, one of the current goats of horror, had a huge part in. Let's move on to Not Just Zombies for 400. This Scare Zone of the Year winner featured an undead German soldier wielding a real flamethrower? Holy HHN really got away with some wild stuff back in the day, as evident by 2009's War of the Living Dead. I'd expect something this immersive in a New York Scare Zone, but to do it in Shrek Alley? That's hot. Time for more iconic entertainment for 400. Infestation, featuring a cast of creepy crawlies swarming a restrained volunteer, was hosted by which icon? I wish the director would have had a more interesting show than Not Fear Factor, but at least by most accounts, he was portrayed by James Keaton in this show, who you guys probably know as being Jack the Clown almost all the time. Back to the Blumhouse for 400. These two soundstage haunts, one from 2019 and one from 2023, were based on films produced by Jason Blum, but distributed by Universal Pictures. It's easy to forget that both Us and The Exorcist Believer were produced by Jason Blum. Even without the backing of Universal, I'd still argue that the cheaper Blumhouse haunts still feel more unique than a chunk of the other IPs we've seen recently.
You're not the first. You're not the first.
If you haven't learned something new yet, I'm sure you will in this final round. Now, is this the last time that we'll see the Wolfman for a while? Time will tell. Willie was an integral part of the streets in 1991. This was the first haunt that the Wolfman appeared in. Universal's House of Horrors from 1995 heralded a flood of Universal Monsters haunts for years to come, and I have a strong hunch that this was the basis for the Monsters section of Monsters and Mayhem. Now, if you happen to know any other milestone haunts for the classic monsters, you may have an advantage in future episodes. On to our final, and for many of you, most memorable graveyard for 500. Each grave within 2023's The Darkest Deal had the lifespan posted of its occupant, and they all lived to be this many years old. If you know of Robert Johnson or The Curse of the 27 Club, all those talented musicians that passed away way too young, you'll appreciate this detail that makes The Darkest Deal that much darker. If they're not just zombies, well, what are they? This neon-soaked skeletal scare zone was the first that many experienced after a new era of darkness took over HHN. I completely adore 2010's Esqueleto Muerte, and I certainly think this type of Day of the Dead zone is something we need more often. I mean, just imagine something like 2024's Monstrous, but with that neon aesthetic. Onto Iconic Entertainment for 500. This icon's weapon of choice was an option in the Whack-A-Troll section in 2015's The Carnage Returns. Now, I wouldn't call most of the icon's signature props weapons, except for the Caretaker Shears. Lastly, we're on to Blumhouse Productions for 500. Surprise! 2018's The Horrors of Blumhouse contained Happy Death Day and The First Purge in Orlando. Hollywood showcased two completely different films in their haunt. What were they? Sometimes bad movies make good haunts, and good movies make bad haunts, and sometimes bad movies make bad haunts. Hollywood featured Truth or Dare and Unfriended, and they both unfortunately showcase the worst aspects of haunt design. I will give it bonus points for the final section based off the Blumhouse logo, but even Orlando's worst haunts feel more purposeful and intentional than this.
I think it's time we quit this place.
And now, just like a 2 a.m. HHN close, it's not over until the last second, because it's time for Fear's Final Gambit, where our category will be tribute stores. Now, go ahead and wager as many points as you'd like, and for you longtime fans, this category might seem a little bit familiar. Consider this episode a requel of HHN Trivia, a fresh start. And don't forget, this will carry over as a category into the next episode. No takesies backsies this time, I promise. Now, let's cut this chit-chat and dive right into Fear's Lantern. This year was the first that the tribute store and adjacent scare zone were tied together by one themed story. It should come as no surprise that after the rise of Lil Boo, Major Sweets would return with a vengeance, especially since 2022's Tribute Store did an incredible job at fleshing out the rest of Hollow Hills that wasn't seen in that year's Sweets Revenge Scare Zone. Now, there's still a lot to learn about HHN, the Legions of Horror, Legendary Truth. There'll be some deep dives coming later this year, and I hope you all enjoyed this episode. Feel free to leave me a comment for categories that you want to see. Now, I'm off to go finish the countdown. Just kidding.